Hello, I'm very sick and I have basically nothing else to do, so I decided I would come on here and I would talk about the last three books I've read, which are The Outsider by Albert Camus, The Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis, and Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut. Slaughterhouse 5 is the one I read most recently, um, and The Outsider is the one I read the longest time ago. And for Bret Easton Ellis and Albert Camus, I'd never read a book by them before, so it was kind of my introduction to them. But for Kurt Vonnegut, I've read two of his books before. Cat's Cradle, which is being used to prop up my phone now, which was my favourite book of all time, which might have topped it. And also um, Mother Night by Kurt Vonnegut, where I'll talk about it later, but the main character in this book also crops up in this book, which is kind of exciting. But let's start with The Outsider. So this is a very, very, very famous novel, and it's quite short. It's only 111 pages long. So there's really not much to this novel. At the start, it's just kind of the famous first line is, let's read it. My mother died today, or maybe yesterday, I don't know. So this is supposed to kind of be, well, this line and the book as a whole is kind of the literary embodiment of Albert Camus' absurdist philosophy, which is kind of a take on existentialism, where instead of just being down and out about everything like you would be if you were a nihilist or something, you embrace the absurd and you kind of do whatever you want and you don't kind of conform to the, I don't know, power structures of society such as religion. I know Camus hated religion. He thought it was philosophical suicide, and he said that you really have kind of three options when you kind of realize that life is just kind of, there's no meaning to it, or it's just a long walk to death, right? First of all is religion. You kind of embrace religion and you embrace faith, and he sees that as essentially a cop out. You're just trying to, you're essentially just creating meaning for the sake of creating meaning, and now you're just kind of living your life towards something that is essentially fake, not real, made up, right? You're following your whole life, you're putting your whole life towards a fiction book. Obviously, this is a controversial take. I do agree with him, but um, so he thinks that that's one way you can go, which he obviously doesn't like. He doesn't like that because that's also kind of just conforming to power structures, and you're leaving yourself in kind of a hierarchy. Like, obviously, organized religion is inherently organized. And then the second option is suicide, right? It's just depression. You fall into this kind of nihilism, and there's no way out. You feel that there's no way out other than to kill yourself, which Albert Camus also sees as just a cop out. And he also says that suicide is the most pressing philosophical question, or philosophical I forgot the word, matter of his time. He believed that all philosophers should be kind of, well, he didn't think of himself as a philosopher, but he thought that all thinkers and philosophers and things like that should all be striving towards trying to stop suicide, because, I mean, reasonably, he thought of it as terrible, and he thought that we need to find a philosophy that shows that suicide is not the way out of these kinds of situations. And I think all of that is just kind of, that's just kind of even more prevalent and important in today's society when, I mean, suicide rates, especially among young people and teenagers, is sky high. Um, and it's obviously, depression and things like that are rampant. So lots of people are turning to that, and Camus thinks that the third option, not religion, not suicide, but embracing the absurd is essentially the way to go. And this book is basically him depicting a man who is he is just embracing the absurd and doing whatever he wants. He doesn't care about what anyone is saying to him, or he doesn't care about conforming to the way that society expects a man to act. I think it's kind of a weird way to show kind of absurdism, to show that this is like a good thing, or that this is what you should be doing, considering at the end of the book he's executed. Um, well, it's a spoiler, sorry. But it's not really a book where spoilers are gonna harm you, I'd say, especially considering it's 111 pages and it's more kind of an exercise in philosophy than a story. But I do really like the book. It's the start of it. He goes to his mum's funeral, and then he comes back, and he's a white French dude or Franco-Algerian dude in Algiers, in Algeria, and he's kind of just lounging around. He's going to his work, and he's going to just going to work. He's going to the baths, to the beach, and he's walking around. He's going to the cafe, and he's seeing his friend. And there's this weird guy in his apartment building with a dog. And in this way, it's kind of a calm, like it's kind of like a Sofia Coppola movie or a Eric Romer movie, like A Summer's Tale, but in Algeria. And he's just kind of wading through life, and then until he shoots a guy on a beach. He shoots an Arab on a beach. There's also some interesting kind of commentary on the French justice system, Franco-Algerian justice system, and that and essentially this is more kind of spoilers, but Marceau, the main character, after he shoots the Arab and kills him, essentially you're kind of led to believe. Camus says that he's not arrested and he's not charged because he's killed an Arab. They don't care that he's killed an Arab because they're all like racist colonialists. But what they care about is his kind of his strange nature, where he doesn't agree with all of these things that they're saying, and he's not trying to uphold some kind of values, or he's not trying to excuse himself for what he's done or make excuses. And that's essentially why he gets arrested and killed, which I suppose helps to show kind of how society is like structured in a strange way that kind of opposes the absurd and thing. I mean, the first line of the book is Marceau will not conform. So overall, I think it's a good book. I think Albert Camus' kind of flat prose style really lends itself to the story, and I think my favorite bit is right at the end when he's essentially on Algerian death row, and he has this chaplain comes to see him, and he has this big argument with the chaplain, and that's my favorite part of the book, because they talk about God and how he doesn't need an all-imposing, almighty God to live his life, which I personally agree with. Okay, the next book is Rules of Attraction by Bret Easton Ellis. These are two very different books, although they're kind of similar in a way. Bret Easton Ellis has kind of a similar kind of flat prose style, and the beginning of each book are kind of similarly morose and monotone and kind of just swanning through daily life kind of thing, and not much really happens. Obviously stuff ends up happening in The Outsider, but in the Rules of Attraction, there's really not that much going on. I originally picked this up because I listened to the podcast series on Bennington College, which is it was pretty good. Um, I now know way too much about Bennington College. But Bennington College is it's like a private liberal arts university college in, I think, Vermont or New Hampshire, Vermont, something like that. And it's very small and it's very weird, and you kind of just choose your degree and your major like just kind of all like willy nilly. Like people in this book, which is set in Camden College, which is essentially Bret Easton Ellis's stand-in for Bennington College. They choose like majors like poetry and that kind of thing, and you take all these weird writing classes. You don't even go to classes, and the point is, Bret Easton Ellis, he went to Bennington College along with the author Jonathan Lethem and the author Donna Tartt, who wrote The Secret History. So I was listening to that podcast series about them and about that weird university, which was, I think at the time, was the most expensive university in the US. But obviously there was a lot of financial aid. So if you so there was kind of a very rich and a kind of regular working class, and there was kind of a separation between them. But this book is essentially about these rich kids from New York and LA and Chicago, and they're at Bennington College, and they're just doing a bunch of like stupid things. They're all kind of living these lives where it's kind of a lot like Outsider, actually, where they're just, I don't know, nothing really matters. One of them, Sean, he doesn't show up to class or anything. They just take a bunch of drugs and they just, I don't know. I would say they have a good time, but they don't really have a good time, to be honest with you. They talk about it. It's kind of the back of the book. The blurb is, it talks about it as if it's a love triangle, and I guess in a way it is a love triangle, but it's not like explicitly a yearning, like a yearning dramatic book. There are those kind of like weird dramatic sequences in it, but I don't know, it's not, it's much more kind of flat and monotone and sad and like, yeah, I guess I care about this person kind of thing, or I hate this person, but I'll do whatever with them anyway. Um, I mean, to sum up, it's just very very strange. It's told from the perspective of a lot of characters. Our main characters are Sean, Lauren, and Paul, and I guess they make up the love triangle. There's also Victor, there's Mitchell, there's a bunch of other people, and we get the perspectives of each one of these characters, and a lot of the time we get the same moment in time and the same meeting told by two different characters, and we can see how they all kind of have differing views on each other, and one of them will be like hugely in love with the other one and think that they're in love with them, and then the other person's like, I don't really care about them, and it's quite like fun in that way that you get to see all different sides. But it's a very very weird book. I mean, for example, it just starts mid sentence. I thought when I first started reading the book, I thought it was like a printing mistake, but nope. It just starts mid book and it ends mid sentence. I mean, and it ends mid sentence as well. It ends with "and she." So it's kind of a weird book. I'm pretty sure Bret Easton Ellis, I think this is his second book. I know he wrote his first book, Less Than Zero, about living as a teenager in LA. He wrote that while he was at Bennington College. And I'm pretty sure kind of his prose style is kind of like modelled off of Joan Didion, which makes sense. Whose prose style is modelled off of Hemingway, I'm pretty sure. But the prose isn't as good as Joan Didion, but it's not that bad. I do want to read another Bret Easton Ellis book, and I want to watch the movie as well. I need to watch the movie. Oh yeah, that reminds me, The Outsider. The Outsider had a movie adaptation, or The Stranger. No, they translate the title of the book differently in a lot of different things. But there's a French language film that came out, I think last year. I watched it last year. No, I watched it this year. at the cinema. I think the director's name is like Francois Ozon or something. It was a good movie. I think it was, I don't know. It was a good movie. It was kind of strange. I don't think it dealt with the absurdist ideas as well as it could have done, but I think it was a fun time. It was serviceable. Um, Slaughterhouse 5, I believe, also has a movie, which won the Grand Jury Prize at Cannes. I haven't watched it yet, but I will soon. I only finished this yesterday or the day before. The day before. And I love this book so much. I mean, you can tell because this is the first book I've ever, like, taken notes and annotations in. Or put these, like, tags in there. It's just such a good book, and Kurt Vonnegut is probably my favorite. He must be my favorite writer. I know I've only read 3 of his books, but to be fair, I haven't read that many books, so that's probably one of the most that I've read. One of the most books, the highest amount of books from an author that I've read. But yeah, so Cat's Cradle was my favorite book of all time, but to be honest, I can't really remember much about it. But this, I don't think I'll ever forget what happens in this book. So if we look at it from the first chapter is really weird, because the first chapter is almost like an introduction to the book, and it's not an introduction, like it's not called introduction, but it's essentially a 20-page introduction where Kurt Vonnegut is telling you, this is my book about Dresden. And Dresden is the city in Germany that was firebombed by the Allies in the tail end of World War II. And Kurt Vonnegut was a prisoner of war in Dresden when it was bombed, and he was staying in Slaughterhouse 5 underground in a bunker where they kind of sheltered from the bombing. And they were basically like the only people to survive in the city. I think there was over 100,000 people who were killed. Like, more people were killed in Dresden than Hiroshima, for example, but it was kept a secret by the US government for years and years and years. Or it wasn't kept a secret, but it was kind of, it was like, it wasn't talked about as much as something like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. So this is the book about that, but it's also a book about just everything, really. We follow Billy Pilgrim, who is kind of based off of Kurt Vonnegut, I guess, in that he is a prisoner of war. He's fighting for the Americans. He's in Germany. He's captured, and we see all of this in the book, where he's captured and he goes in like a boxcar train carriage, and they take him. They get him to meet a bunch of Englishmen in wherever, and then they get taken off to Dresden, and they're like put to work in factories in Dresden, and we see him coming out of kind of their bunker and just seeing the entire city destroyed and not knowing what to do because there's literally no one else there because they're all dead, which is quite sad. But in the same way that Kurt Vonnegut does with basically all of his books, is he makes these kind of horrible subjects funny. Well, then he doesn't make the bombing of Dresden funny, but the book overall is funny. For instance, Cat's Cradle, which is essentially about the atomic bomb and the implications of the atomic bomb, is very funny. Mother Night, which is about the Holocaust and being put on trial for war crimes, for Nazi war crimes, is also very funny. And it's also just kind of a lot more than an anti-war book, because it's told in a non-linear fashion and with a lot of science fiction elements. So Billy Pilgrim, who's our main character, like I said, he is unstuck in time, which basically means that he can, in his mind, I just bit my tongue. There's something wrong with me. Okay, so he can just kind of closes his eyes, or he just kind of teleports in time, just kind of freely and randomly, and he kind of has no control over it, but he just travels in time to. He's an optometrist when he's not in the war. He's an optometrist in Ilium, New York, and in like Cape Cod and stuff. And by the end of the book, he's trying to, or by the end of his life, he's trying to go to. He's trying to tell the world of his exploits of being unstuck in time. And one of the main ways he comes to understand how he has become unstuck in time and can essentially time travel in a way that is, well, how he can time travel and why he can time travel and how the book is really being told, whether, you know, this is just from page 1 to page 177 when it ends, is that, you know, is this just the whole story of Dresden and he's time traveling, or is this him recounting things but time traveling, or we don't really know essentially when this is kind of being told. He's just kind of time traveling all over the place, and the nature of his like life isn't really fully explained to us, which I think is what makes it a good book, and really interesting to read. But what was I gonna say? Um, yeah, so he also, as well as being unstuck in time, well, this is part of the time thing, is that he is um, kidnapped by aliens from the planet Tralfamador, which is a planet it is important in this book, Sirens of Titan, and there's actually kind of a recurring character in Sirens of Titan and Slaughterhouse 5. Well, there's the same last name, Rumford. In this book, it's kind of about this like billionaire dude called Winston Niles Rumford. For some reason, I haven't finished this book. I really don't know what's wrong with me. I literally can't read this book for some reason. It must have been a year since I started it now. But I don't know if I'm gonna restart it or if I'll just finish it or if I'll just never ever read it. But I don't know what's going on there. But point is, he's kidnapped by Tralfamadorians, and Tralfamadorians are these people who they live in a completely different world, and they view the world in 4D, in 4 dimensions, which is kind of funny because one of the books that my phone is holding up is Flatland by Edwin A. Abbott, which is about living in a 2 dimensional world. And I've been kind of reading a lot about different dimensions, and I've got the YouTuber Tibby's book on dimensions and living in 4 dimensions and 2 dimensions and that kind of thing. But in this book, the 4th dimension that the Tralfamadorians see is time. So they see everything as kind of, I think it's like everything is all the times put together. So if you're just walking along, they don't just see, oh, you're putting one foot in front of the other. They see like a blur, like when you take a photo of something that's moving, because they see all of the time things, all of it at once, essentially, and they understand what he describes as the true nature of time, and through that come to the conclusion that you're never really dead. You're just kind of at one point you're dead, but time is not linear. Time isn't. It's not even like I don't know, a quadratic or a cubic or something. It's just like it's just there and it's always there and it's cut up and it's all happening at the same time, which leads Kurt Vonnegut to write every single time that death is mentioned in the book, or every single time that someone's death is mentioned in the book. Kurt Vonnegut, or Billy Pilgrim, writes "So it goes," and "So it goes" is what the Tralfamadorians say when someone has died, because they know the true nature of time, and they know that they haven't actually just died. They're not dead. They're not put to rest. You know, they're still going to carry on living, just in other times. And because again, it's not kind of a linear walk to death like we were talking about in The Outsider. It's more of a everything is happening at once kind of thing. And it's really weird and hard to sum up this book, but it's just amazing. And one of the best parts of the book for me is when the main character of this book, Howard W. Campbell Jr., who is a war criminal. He was a American spy he was a spy for the Americans during World War II, and he essentially was a huge propaganda minister for Hitler, and he did all of these radio speeches to the US, and he was essentially very, very, very good at his job. I have a whole video on this and White Noise by Don DeLillo, so you can, if you want to watch that, I'll go into more detail there. But essentially, he's kind of pretending to be this Nazi propagandist, and he's very good at it, but he's actually an American. And he comes up in this book because they read like a pamphlet about American prisoners. And that's this blue tag here, and it's just, I don't know, I just think it kind of sums up, I guess, America and the way that, I guess, the modern state of the West, and how it's just like, I don't know, how kind of the myth of capitalism, of that, people on the right especially, they talk about how, I think Vonnegut was a socialist, I'm not sure, but people on the right, they don't want to tax the rich or whatever, because they think that they can become rich, that they will be them one day, when it's very, very, very likely that they'll probably just be living in, I don't know, in poverty or near poverty for the rest of their lives, but they're supporting these billionaires, and they don't want them to be taxed, or they don't want that wealth to be distributed, or they don't even want that wealth, in the case of America, to go to healthcare or anything, because they think that, they think they live in America, they can make all this money, but really that's just a myth. And that's what Howard W. Campbell Jr. says in this book, which I think is kind of a reflection of Kurt Vonnegut's views. Another thing I really like in this book is Kurt Vonnegut's use of the character Kilgore Trout. And Kilgore Trout is a character who I think comes up in a lot of Vonnegut books, but this is the first time he's come in a book that I've read, I think, that I can remember. I think he's more in like Breakfast of Champions and God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. But Kilgore Trout is a very unsuccessful science fiction writer, and it allows Kurt Vonnegut he's kind of a stand-in for Vonnegut, but obviously Vonnegut is a much better writer and much more successful. Although I think at this point, when he was writing this and the other two books I've read, he wasn't making a huge amount of money from his books. But Kilgore Trout has written like over 1,000 short stories and over 100 novels, and it allows Kurt Vonnegut to just put in a random paragraph that's essentially just a summary of a science fiction novel, and it's just this crazy premise, which all of a sudden you'll be thinking about this premise for like the next hour, and you won't be able to read the next 20 pages of the book. But anyway, I really like this book. I really like all three of these books, to be honest, and I recommend that you read them. I do this. These two are very short, so you could probably, if you actually just sat down and read them, you could read these in a day. This one is a bit longer. I think it's like 325 pages, but it's also very good. I would say this is the order. This is my favorite. This is my second favorite, and this is my third favorite. But they're all very good books, and I'm happy that I've read all of them. And yeah, goodbye. Subscribe.